First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this workshop. So give me the opportunities to interact not only people on this campus, but also people from Walmart and the JB Hunt. And the topic is GIScience beyond absolute space. I will explain what it means, human-centered GIScience framework. In fact, Dan Shih and I, we have worked on this together, but I only have my name there just in case anything goes wrong in this presentation. I take full responsibility, so I will not get Dan into trouble. Okay, so in 1995, Max Ankenhofer and David Mark of NCGIA NSF founded center. Mike was the director back then, National Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. They published a report on naive geography, and they argued that naive geography can capture and reflect the ways people think and the reason about geographic space and time. Mike mentioned this morning the importance of space and time in practice. And they also said that future GIS can be built from the formal models of common sense geographic world, and which can be used by average citizen. Again, we need to define what an average citizen is, but in day-to-day tests without receiving major training. That's very interesting. And they also said naive geography can be the basis for the design of intelligent GIS that will act and respond as a person would. So this was published almost 25 years ago. So I was wondering how close we are to what Max and David envisioned almost 25 years ago. If we are not quite there, what are missing in the GIS? So if we look at conventional GIS, we use what Mike showed that these static GIS map layers mapping the locations of different things in physical space. So this is very much based on Newton's absolute space concept, and we use Euclidean geometry and the Cartesian coordinate system to implement the conventional GIS. But this particular conceptualization of space, I think probably has major limitations when we want to bring humans into GIS. So for example, if we are thinking about convergent GIS science with the humanities, social sciences, or even health science and the physical science, we all care about humans, but how we have represented humans in GIS. So are they just aggregate numbers by census tract, by counties, or just some points there? So that's what we come up with the idea about, we call it space, place, or spatial GIS science framework. And then last year in 2018, we proposed a draft framework we called multi-space GIS science framework, which included, in addition to absolute space, also relative space and relational space, mental space. And then this year we expanded it and published another article in the Annals of AAG to incorporate also different concepts of place, which include location, locale, place identity, and the sense of place. So we also argue that in this new GIS science framework, humans will become the center of the framework instead of the absolute locations in physical space. So I'm going to explain what we mean. So on the absolute space side, this is the conventional GIS, and which have been very useful to serve many different applications, and they will continue to be useful and improve. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But what do I mean by relative space? And Mike already talked about this. That's very good. The middle diagram is somehow missing when we copy it to this machine, this computer. So if we are thinking about autonomous vehicles, what kind of GIS database do we need to support autonomous vehicles? And we know autonomous vehicles, they are equipped with all these sensors. And these sensors are going to detect all of these different kinds of objects around each autonomous vehicles. And like Mike said, if we are going to do parking in New York City, what kind of positional accuracy do we need? Probably 5 to 10 centimeters. And can we build a global GIS database as a positional accuracy level? Probably yes. But how often can we update it? Even we can update it every hour. Around each autonomous vehicle, there are these moving cars and bicycles, pedestrians. So the conventional static kind of GIS database collapsed in terms of supporting autonomous vehicles. And also, if we are thinking about indoor navigation, probably most of us don't really think in terms of absolute locations, like the relative locations and augmented reality kind of wayfinding probably will be more intuitive to human beings, okay? And if we are thinking about relational space, and many of us also work on different kinds of social networks, either in physical space or online social networks. In this case, we don't really care about the exact location of each person at those nodes in this social network. And we focus more on the connections and the identity of each of those individuals in this network. So it's more topological relations rather than absolute locations in this case. So that's an example of relational space. And if we are talking about mental space, for example, Esri, ESRI, the ArcGIS company, has been promoting story maps. And this is from their story maps team about the maps inside our heads. And it says our ability to recall places and to maintain mental maps are closely linked to our ability to remember events and the episodes in our lives. And you know, there are some interesting questions. For example, how do we remember and recall locations and routes? Either there's fastest route to the local supermarket or the relative locations of city landmarks, or how do we navigate through space? And do we really have maps in our mind? And how do our brains go about making sense of the environment, the world, the space around us? So I'm going to use this particular story map as an example, women's suffrage. So simply, you know, producing these maps showing the evolution of women's suffrage across space over time can be very useful, but that doesn't tell us the whole story about women's suffrage. So the first Women's Rights Convention, the story about this convention also is important to the topic. And who was the first woman casted the vote actually in Salt Lake City, Utah? And so also who are the other, oh, sorry, this screen capture also didn't come through. Who are the other leaders of this movement, okay? So in order to tell the full story, conventional maps produced by the conventional GIS probably are not sufficient. So that's why we think beyond the absolute space, which focuses on absolute location and tend to answer questions about where are the different objects, relative space, which deal with relative location either to a fixed object or to a moving object like autonomous vehicle. They can answer questions such as what are around us better. And relational space will work with relations among different objects and can answer questions such as what are related to us, either in physical space or in the cyberspace, in the virtual space. And the mental space part will deal with the cognitive mental aspects of space and deal with questions about what people have in mind about the space, the environment around us. And then in terms of the concepts of place, Yifu Tuan, who is a humanistic geographer, published this very well-known book, Space and Place. And he argues that place is an area in a space that humans have given meaning to it. For example, where we are right now, this XY coordinate has been here for a long time. But 150 years ago, there was no University of Arkansas. I think you are close to 150 years, right? Like 148 now. And even University of Arkansas 100 years ago, you know, the place concept probably was very different from what people perceive University of Arkansas today. So place has different kinds of meaning to humans. And so place is a social construction that is unique to particular people, and it changes over time. So to bring space concepts and the place concept together, John Agnew of UCLA said that the concept of place includes three major ideas. One is location, which can be represented by XY coordinates easily, and the locale is more about the context, either the environmental, physical context, or the socio-economic, cultural context around us. And the sense of place can be defined by human subjective perception or attachment to a particular location or locale. And then Wainwright and Barnes, they discuss three different views of the relationship between space and the place. One is place trumps space. And this was advocated by many humanistic geographers back in the 1970s. And they consider space just as a background context for place, okay? And then the other view is space trumps place. And in this case, places are considered just as sites, stops, pauses, staging posts of those flows, interactions, actions taking place in space that Mike suggested could be an interesting topic for the future research. So in this case, it's more probably advocated by spatial analysts, GIS people, quantitative geographers. In this case, space plays a more critical role than places. But the third view is they are actually relational. So that's space and the place. And the space and place are connected with each other, okay? So in our framework, we actually took the third view. So absolute space, we associate with location concept or place. And so the focus is on specific position or site. And conventional GIS can handle this very well. In terms of relative space, we associate it with the concept of locale. So now the focus is on the situation rather than the site, the context rather than the particular specific location about those objects. And in relational space, because our focus is on topological relations rather than topological relations rather than absolute locations, so the place identity plays a more important role in relational space. And the mental space, that's how we sense different places. So it's associated with sense of place, and this can reflect what people have in mind about a particular location, locale, or place identity associated with either absolute space, relative space, or relational space, okay? And the story maps, I think, is moving towards this direction. So to summarize all of this space, place, or spatial GIS science framework, we think is more human-centered. And we try to expand the conventional GIS by integrating multiple concepts of space and the place. So, you know, I would argue probably down the road, it should receive a higher priority in terms of future GIS, because humans are important to many problems we are trying to tackle. And conventional GIS, to a good extent, have downplayed that part. And tie this to this workshop. So by introducing additional concepts of space and place into GIS science, then what would be some implications in terms of the challenges to reproducibility or replicability. And also, if we try to consider also like mental space, relational space, what are the implications of this new GIScience framework to convergent GIScience if we want to make GIScience more intuitive and useful to people in the humanities, social sciences, or health science and physical science? So I will stop here, and hopefully this afternoon we can have more discussions. Okay, thank you.